What's up, guys? I'm back with another class breakdown for the Bestial Devout in Convergence mod. Let's get into it. So it's been a little while since my last breakdown video, and this is because we were doing some work on the Bestial class because we realized that it needed some tuning and some adjustment and some additions in order for it to accomplish the sort of goals that we envisioned, and that previous patches, iterations of it, weren't quite meeting the contract, so to speak, with the class. So we've revamped it, and so that means on patch 1.4.1 we'll get sort of a fresh take on the Bestial Devout. And so that's what I'm going to be breaking down, is the stuff for the upcoming patch, and I'm not going to be really talking about the way that it worked prior to 1.4.1. So the class is mostly about, so it sort of starts out with like a slight emphasis on strength, but it scales pretty much entirely with faith. Faith is its primary scaling. It does pretty good stagger damage. The damage type it deals is physical. Pretty good stagger damage. It has some ranged options, but as of the new rework, it has a much stronger emphasis on close range spells. So getting front and center and delivering lots of damage when things are nearby. And sort of, it has like sort of spheres of influence that are sort of act like rings that have different ranges. So when it's outside certain range, enemies will be subject to certain attacks, and then inside that range, other attacks. And so basically, the sort of density of your options increases the closer something gets, kind of similar to Giant's Flame in that same way. But it has an emphasis on stagger damage because it is physical, and it also has some new mechanics that we're going to talk about. So let's get started. The first spell that is now one of the introductory spells for the class is called Beast Talons. And this is a new spell as of this patch. And the way that it works is you do a combo of sort of claw strikes. And then from here, it will loop. So the first one is sort of a lunge where you hit with both. And then the rest are alternating 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. And you can sort of loop that forever like Carian Slicer. Unlike Carian Slicer, it does not have a jump attack, and it does not have a crouching attack, and it does not have a roll attack. It is just basically only standing attacks for this one. This is something we might end up adjusting in the future, but for now, that's how we're rolling it out initially. Damage on this is very good, considering the FP cost and stamina cost. Like, it's pretty decent damage. Of course, all of the balancing stuff is still subject to change. Okay, so here we get to our first mechanic, new mechanic. What we noticed was that bestial spells are sort of split into two categories. You've got some that are like stone, and then some that are like claws, right? So some are like trying to cut, and then some are trying to like bash or bludgeon, right? And so what we've done is we've added an additional mechanic to these things. If you hit something with one of the claw or cutting spells, then they will become rended, or it'll afflict them with rend. And what Rend does is it makes it so that the damage that the enemy receives from physical is increased by 5% for a short duration, like 15 seconds, basically. So the idea here is that you're sort of rending their armor, or rending their defenses. So they're going to take 5% increased damage for 15 seconds. Notice that it doesn't last very long, and that's very much on purpose. The idea here is that you can get Rend going, but then you also need to capitalize on it and follow up with it. You can't just joust and poke. You actually need some pressure in order to capitalize off of that. Up next, we have Gravel Sling. Gravel Sling does not apply any of the new mechanics. It is what it was from vanilla. One of the reasons why is that in the mod, Gravel Sling's damage is actually pretty good, like very good, I would say. And it has the convenience of a jump attack and a roll attack. And so it's so useful in so many situations because of its low opportunity cost and because of its decently high damage and extremely low FP cost, that we didn't feel that it needed anything extra to be viable. Up next, we have Stone Throw, which is in the previous iteration, but we have made it better. Now it'll now travel further. It's less visually obnoxious. Like the way that it worked before was the visual was really dusty and hard to see the projectile, whereas now you can actually see it, and it will actually go pretty decently far. So it's your earliest good long range option. You can see you can throw it extremely far. And the damage on it's quite good as well. It also afflicts enemies with one of the new mechanics, which is called Concussion. Okay, so Concussion it's just another one that when you hit them with it, it affects them, and it lasts 15 seconds just like Rend. But instead of making them take more damage, what it does is it makes them deal less damage. And the amount of damage they deal that is less is 10%. So Rend makes him take 5% more, and Concussion makes him deal 10% less. And so you have this sort of offensive, defensive toolkit, and you have to constantly be asking yourself, what is my role here? Am I meant to be the aggressor? Am I meant to be on the defensive? And you sort of pick which one's going to work the best. Up next, we have Crucible Horn. So we have changed the names of some of these things to make them more clear, because you've got Rend spells, you've got Concussion spells, and then you have Crucible spells. This is the third one. All Crucible spells will now heal you by 5% of your total HP whenever you cast them. Not whenever you hit something with them, whenever you cast them, you will heal 5%. And so that's the sort of three-pronged approach of Bestial now. Rend, Concussion, Crucible. And so Crucible, once again, is very defensive, right? In that you can hit something with concussions, they're dealing less damage, and then you can heal. I should note, none of these effects stack with themselves, right? You can't stack Rend stacks on something over and over again. It doesn't work. Same with Concussion. They don't stack. They're just one-time things. They last for a little while, and then they go away. If you hit them again while it's already active, it will simply refresh the duration. We found that when you're stacking things like that on enemies, that it tends to cause all kinds of crazy unwanted bugs. But the Crucible spells now heal you. All of them do. So, and some of them have actually been changed into to be Crucible spells now, so that they would have this 5% buff. And so I have renamed all the ones that are to have the word Crucible in the front, so it's 100% clear which ones are which. So yeah, Crucible Horn. The uncharge is very fast, but very short range. The full charge, pretty decently long range, and you can see that heal going off every time I'm using it. So Crucible Horn's still good. The damage it does is good. The poise damage it does is good. And it likes to launch enemies up into the air, which is also very good. And it has more of a role now. All the Crucible spells are more attractive now because of that healing mechanic. And there's even more stuff that we'll talk about in a little bit. Savage Lunge. This is another new spell. So it's a two-part sort of melee-ish spell. You leap forward, hit, and then you leap forward again and do a smash into the ground. So Savage Lunge is meant to be a gap closer, right? It travels you a pretty far distance forward. So the idea here is that if something is trying to get away from you, let's say you're using talons or other close range things, Lunge will allow you to stay on top of them. That's like the concept behind it. Damage on it's pretty good, and the second hit has a decent AoE. The first part of it afflicts Rend, and the second part of it afflicts Concussion. So it's one of the ways to get both statuses in one spell, basically, which is pretty nice. Okay, Beast Claw. Beast Claw has been improved tremendously. The range and width has been increased, right? And so you cast the non-charged, it goes pretty far. Cast the full charge, it goes very far. As you can see, like, this style of spell is better against large enemies because you're more likely to hit things with it. But oftentimes you still will hit things with this, even though that little enemies can still slip between the gaps in the claws. It's still a vastly improved version of it. It's also very mana efficient, and it does apply Rend, which is helpful. Okay, up next, Crucible Vitality. So this used to be Beast Vitality, but once again, we renamed it Crucible so that you know that when you cast it, you automatically get 5% of your HP back. Yes, it is just a healing over time, but it has been repurposed. So we had two. There was Beast Vitality and Primal Regeneration. So now they're Crucible Vitality and Crucible Regeneration. And they are both now in the same buff category, so you can't stack them any longer. However, Crucible Vitality is much stronger than it used to be. It is a more powerful healing over time than it used to be. Whereas Regeneration is slightly less powerful, but also gives you some FP regen along with it. But they both give you the 5% heal your total HP whenever you cast them, which they did not have before. So, Earth and Spikes has been reworked. It used to basically do what Beast Claw is trying to do, and so instead we just improved Beast Claw and completely reworked Earth and Spikes. Spikes is now a Stomp that is much shorter range. Damage on it is very good, and it applies Rend. It's a great panic button spell. It's very strong. It's a lot better than you might think. Basically, the damage on it's pretty good, the range is not bad, and it's very quick and easy to cast, so that makes it very useful. Basically, the way I think about it is it's sort of a replacement for Gravel Sling, because it does apply one of the statuses, but you don't have the convenience of jumping and rolling using those type of attacks with it. But the damage is also extremely high. So, okay, up next, we have Dragon Maul. So this is one of the Dragon's Communion spells. Dragon Maul hasn't really been changed, except for the fact that the damage on it is completely ridiculous. It's probably one of the hardest hitting, highest damage single spells in the mod. It just hits really, really hard. Because of the difficulty in using it, it's close range, it's slow, and close range and slow is usually a pretty terrible combination for a spell in general. So to compensate for that, we're saying you hit really, really, really hard with it. So if you're able to do it, awesome. It also does a ton of poise damage. That's another thing we did. And it applies Concussion and Rend as well. It does both. Stone Spears. So this was one of the more difficult ones to balance in previous patches because it has the same animations as Gravel Sling, giving it all the convenience in the world. So rather than try to retool it, one thing that people talk about is how the damage on it is barely more than Gravel Sling, but it costs like 1,000,000 times more FP, making it kind of silly. And I agree, except for a couple of things. One, it has range. It has a lot of range. Another thing is that the bullets never expire. So if you shoot it up in the air, they're going to fall all the way to the ground before they stop. And so that means that it's useful in a lot of situations, but it does take a lot of FP. The new addition to the spell is that the damage has been increased very slightly, and it now applies both Concussion and Rend. So it's a way to very quickly and efficiently apply those two statuses to something without using a lot of opportunity costs. So the idea here is not you're going to spam this over and over, because it's not very mana efficient to do that. The idea is that you use it to apply your statuses, and then you go to more efficient things for the next 15 seconds, and then you refresh or whatever. Rather than the spell being simply something that you're trying to make spam, if that makes sense. So now the FP cost is a lot more justified. All right, up next, Bestial Strength. So this is unchanged from previous patch. Gives you a little damage buff, gives you some stamina recovery. So up next, we have Seismic Instability. So this is the first sort of new concept of spell that we've made for this class, which is the Earthquake-style spells. Seismic Instability does a foot stomp that then creates a shockwave around you, which deals damage to things, and then leaves a small earthquake where you stomped. That lasts for, I think, 6 seconds. When the earthquake is ongoing, things take continuous damage while they're in it. The shockwave applies concussion. So he's using his shield to block, but you can see that this is very strong because of how disruptive it is to enemies. The fact that you can just leave these on the ground, back away, and have them walk into it is very good. Also really good for generating lots of poise damage because it prevents the enemy's poise meter from resetting. One thing I will say is that all Earthquake-style spells, any of them that leave an Earthquake, you can only ever have one Earthquake active at a time. They will cancel each other out. That way you can't stack Earthquakes on top of each other and cause all kinds of issues. So, all right, Crucible Tail. So the next offensive Crucible spell. So a single tap will do 1 heal, 1 tail. Hold will do 2 heals, 2 tails. So you get 5% 2 times healing on that one. It's very good. Garonk's Beast Claw's unchanged from previous patch. Though I will say that I intend on reworking this spell a little bit more a little later. For now, it does apply Rend, though. I should note that Crucible spells don't apply Rend or Concussion. Alright, Stone of Garonk. The range and accuracy and speed of the projectiles of Stone of Garonk have been increased. It also now applies Concussion. The spell is just more likely to hit things you're locked onto now. It's also less likely to go over the head of things, though that is still possible. We didn't want to make that impossible. We just wanted to make it less likely to happen, and it is less likely now. Crucible regeneration. So, like I talked about before, it's basically the same as Crucible Vitality, except it does a little less healing and a little more FP regeneration. So Landslide has been improved. It has been widened and made more consistent with its hitboxes. It's also been given a slightly different visual. But essentially, it's your upgrade to Beast Claw. But unlike Beast Claw, it applies Concussion and not Rend. Okay, Crucible Spear. So this is your very long range projectile from previous patches. It is the same, except it now heals you with all Crucible spells do. Okay, Garon's Upheaval has been completely reworked to become Boulder Volley. So Boulder Volley works like this. It's essentially, if you're not locked on, then it's the same as Garon's Upheaval. You reach in the ground, rocks come up, and then they fall back down. But if you are locked on now, it does this. They come up, and they fly forward and smash the thing. One thing to note is that the tracking on Boulder Volley gets worse and worse the closer the thing is to you. The idea is that if it's super close, then it doesn't need to track because it's going to come up and come back down. But it also means that it's less specific when it's very close. So this wasn't really meant to be a spell that was used at point-blank range on very small enemies. It's meant to be a spell that's used point-blank range on very large enemies. But also, you can shoot things from far away with it. So the reasoning here is that if you're far away from something, the enemy won't get hit by the stones as they come up out of the ground. They'll only get hit by the ones as they're coming back down. So the tracking makes sense. But if you're very, very close, they're getting hit by both the ones coming up and the ones coming down. And so it's more balanced if the tracking is not as accurate when you're very, very close. It's just a simple design decision to make it more versatile in different situations. It's almost like a modal spell where it has different modes depending on what you're trying to do with it. Some spells in this game work with modes in terms of charged versus uncharged, whereas this one has sort of an intrinsic built-in mode, and it's determined by range. Up next, Seismic Shock has been reworked to become Earthquake. So it's a lot like Seismic Instability, except a larger Earthquake, and it lasts longer. But it also has charged and uncharged, so there's sort of two spells in one here. You've got normal Earthquake. So it's pretty big size, and this lasts 8 seconds. And then there's Charged Earthquake, which is bigger, even bigger than the previous Earthquake, and it lasts 12 seconds. Also, the Shockwave does more damage on the full charge. Both of these apply Concussion. But just like I said before, these Earthquakes don't stack. You can't put multiple Earthquakes on top of each other. They will just simply cancel each other out. Okay, now we get into the two legendary enchantments, both of which have been reworked. So, Bestial Fervor, while active, all physical damage you deal is increased by 10%. Your max equip load is increased by 20%. Your total SP is increased by 15%, which is stamina points. It's increased by 15%. Your total absorption is decreased by 20%. This effect never expires. So this one is very straightforward. It just makes you deal more damage, it makes you more efficient, it improves you in every way, but lowers your defenses a little bit. So rather than make these two spells range versus not range, or caster versus not caster, instead the division is aggressive versus defensive. So this is the aggressive one. You're getting a lot of aggressive stats, it's very good, you're lowering your defenses a little bit. That's it. You're trying to be more aggressive than defensive. And then Source of Creation's completely changed. Increases your total HP by 15%. While active, healing received by Crucible spells is increased to 10% total HP, and the effectiveness of Crucible Vitality, Crucible Regeneration, and Stone Skin is increased. So all your Crucible spells heal you for 5%. With Source of Creation active, they heal you for 10%. And your buffs are better, as well as you have higher total HP. So this combination of having higher total HP and having a higher percentage HP heal is really strong, especially considering that a lot of these Crucible spells are actually healing over time as well. And so this becomes like one of the most, like, it doesn't sound like much when you say it, but when you put it all together, it's quite ridiculous. And then let's look at the other effects that you gain from Source of Creation with the buffs. So Crucible Vitality, let's look at that. So Crucible Vitality. So normally it's going to give you 17 HP per second for 3 minutes. But when it's improved, it gives you 25 HP per second for 3 minutes. So way stronger of a heal. And then the next one is not Bestial Strength. It is Crucible Regeneration. So the normal one gives you 15 HP per second and 1 FP per second for 3 minutes. The improved version gives you 17 HP per second and 2 FP per second for 3 minutes. So the big improvement here is the FP regeneration. Getting 2 per second is borderline overpowered. Considering that your base is 1, so you get 1 and you've increased it by 100%. And then you get 2, then you've tripled it, right? And so the rate of, like, tripling your FP regeneration rate is something we have to be very cautious about. And so, like, this legendary enchantment, I think Source of Creation, when you put it all together, is just crazy. And then, like, Stone Skin. Right, Stone Skin is a new spell, and I don't have it right now. Okay. Okay, so Stone Skin is another, obviously a new spell, and here's what it does. Increases your physical absorption by 15% and causes enemy attacks to rebound off of your body for 2 minutes. And then when Source of Creation is active, increases physical absorption by 30%, non-physical absorption by 15%, and causes enemy attacks to rebound off your body, and makes you less likely to stagger for 2 minutes. So this is one of the greatest improvements that you get from Source of Creation, because it doubles the amount of physical absorption, adds 15% non-physical absorption, still has the attack rebound, and also gives you hyper armor for 2 minutes. It's pretty absurd. There is some things that I'm planning, I'm sort of tinkering around with in my head about adding some similar stuff for Bestial Fervor, because Fervor right now is sort of the buff unto itself. And one of the reasons why is that in a defensive playstyle, opportunity costs of recasting buffs are less of a detriment to the playstyle, right? So improving all of these buffs is fine if you're playing the more sort of Crucible defensive, I'm going to stay alive, I'm going to play attrition and outlast, than it is if you're playing aggressive. Because oftentimes playing aggressive means you're going to use every opportunity you have to deal damage. You're not going to waste damage opportunities by rebuffing. So making Bestial Fervor augment buffs feels like it's not actually good for the aggressive player. The aggressive player wants the perma buff that they're using to be the only thing they have to worry about. That way they don't have to waste attack openings on rebuffing. So, but I am thinking about adding some new ways to sort of maybe exploit the concussion and rend mechanics into Fervor somehow. It's kind of tricky to do from a technical perspective, but I would like to be able to make it so that while Fervor is active, something extra happens when you hit enemies that are affected by rend or concussion. But it's a technical thing we'll have to sort of look at a little bit later, basically. But for this iteration, I can already tell you that the Bestial Devout spell class is now among one of the strongest because of the well-roundedness of the toolkit. Them having strong offensive and strong defensive options at this point. It sort of reminds me a little bit of the way that Fundamentalist plays out. It's just sort of a different, like, a different crystallization of a similar playstyle, in that you could totally be like a Bestial Paladin style class, for example. So now we'll talk about some weapons. So the weapon that increases all damage you're dealing with their spells is the Syncadea, which of course you find by the Sanctum Undercroft behind the Beast Sanctum. Your primary spellcasting tool is the Earthbreaker Seal, which you find in Ariza's Hero's Grave. And then of course there's quite a few Bestial vanilla weapons, but the two that we're going to focus on that are mod only are Stone Claws and Sword of Hedaya. So Stone Claws is a claw weapon. Very good faith scaling on this. generally good moveset. Most claw weapons have a great moveset. And then it has this weapon art. A lot like Horalu. One thing is that this weapon art does pretty good poise damage, and it also gives you hyper armor. And you can cancel out of it at almost any stage of the way by rolling. So it's not nearly as committal as it might appear. Which is nice. And then there is Skarda's sword, the Sword of Hedaya. It's a different take on the Ordovis sword. And it has Crucible's Fury. So basically one of Skarda's move combos, where he does his leap up in the air and then followed by a slash. And that slash damage on that attack is quite high. Similar to how his is extremely high as well. But it's a really fun sword to use. You could even power stance it with Ordovis's if you wished, or of course you can make copies, but I don't know why when I'm power stancing I don't necessarily like to power stance with the exact same weapon twice. Okay, now we have armors. So I am wearing the caster set, which is the Beast Clergy set. It increases faith by 2, reduces cost of incantations by 4, and increases damage of bestial incantations. So absolutely meant for damage with spells, this one. The more hybrid set is the Crucible Knight set. I believe both of them, there might be slight variations. So the Crucible Axe increases faith and endurance, and increases all physical damage by 1%. So the hybrid set always will increase all physical damage, rather than just spells or just weapons, because the idea is that you're going to be using spells and weapons with a hybrid build. And so yeah, the Crucible Axe and Crucible Tree sets do the exact same thing. They are your hybrid options, just different fashion is built in there. And then your last set is the Beast Champion set. So this is for the more melee bestial scaling class. So strength and faith, and reduces weapon stamina costs and increases physical weapon damage. So I mean, the thing about this one is that it could work for a number of different builds, even though it is more designed for bestial. You know, because it has strength and faith, you know, it's a little bit more flexible. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Alright, so those are the armor sets. Now, as a class, because everything has just been reworked and things are relatively new, I don't have a lot of data about what all the different encounters in the game are like with this class right now. But I can tell you that in the few playthroughs I've done with the new configuration, that everything feels better than it did. Everything always kind of felt a bit like an uphill battle when I was doing Bestial before now. But with this iteration, everything feels great, and some things might need to be tuned up still, or some things might need to be tuned down a bit. But, you know, we could probably expect some fine-tuning from here on, but I feel like this is a much stronger foundation for the class than what was previously there. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Don't forget to like and subscribe on the YouTube, and also don't forget to try to become a patron. It really does help us. Our patrons make this whole thing possible. You know, the modding is a passion project for us, and so we really appreciate the support. But yeah, thanks everyone for watching. I should have the Dragon Cultist video out before too terribly long. I'm hoping to get it out within the next week. But yeah, thanks everyone, and see you next time.